Good morning. My name is Dr. Brian Duncan. I'm the president-elect of SAGES, and I have the honor of kicking off this session this morning. So, SAGES is a society whose leaders get to be leaders by doing lots of hard work. You roll up your sleeves, you dive in, and you get the work done. Dr. L. Michael Brunt has some pretty long sleeves. He's been rolling them up for 23 years for this society in almost every facet of leadership. He started with something we call the SAGES Grand Rounds. He then moved on to Program Committee, and then Finance Committee, our first bandit in that role. Actually, it was a pretty good year financially. Next was Educational Resources, followed by the Continuing Educational Committee, a philosophy he obviously took to heart even in high school. He then took on the role of treasurer in 2010 and helped our society navigate some scary times in the financial market. I know one of Mike's proudest accomplishments was the year he spent writing and directing a video documentary for Dr. George Bursey's life, which debuted at the annual meeting in 2013. And now he's moved on to president as a leadership role in this society. Mike earned his bachelor's degree from the University of Mississippi, attended Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, and served his residency at Barnes Hospital and Washington University, where he is now a professor of surgery and director of the MIS Clinical Fellowship Program. His two professional loves are clinical outcome studies in minimally invasive surgery and education and training of medical students and surgical residents, as seen here in this slide. His clinical work includes laparoscopic adrenal surgery and complex hernia surgery. He's an extraordinarily hard-working physician, unafraid to take risks. Sometimes those risks lead to setbacks and a fall, as seen here in Salt Lake City last year. But he knows how to bounce back, as he did later this day, self-medicate a bit, and ultimately reach his goal. But Mike has other loves in his life. The first is his wife of 32 years, Beth, a surgical pathologist with specialization in liver pathology. She is section head of liver pathology and GI pathology at Washington University. There's his eldest son, Eric, daughter-in-law, Lindsay, younger son, Timothy, and Timothy's fiancée and soon-to-be wife, Stephanie. Most recently, there is a new love in Mike's life that keeps him perpetually smiling, his granddaughter, Avery. In preparing for this opening, I asked members of the executive committee to describe Mike Brunt, and they used these words: deliberate, thoughtful, man of integrity, genuinely nice person, focused, driven, musical, thoughtful, a calming, deliberate, and comforting force. One said, he's Clark Kent. This mild-mannered, intellectual gentleman leader puts on sunglasses, holds a mic, and transforms into a rock star. Personally, Mike has taught me about leadership. He's enthusiastic and driven, but never lets that cloud his judgment. Ask him a difficult question, and he will pause a beat, ponder, and then respond in a thoughtful, intellectual, and respectful manner with diplomacy. He has guided the society over the last year masterfully, and has been an honor to serve at his side. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce to you my friend and colleague, Dr. Michael Brunt, your SAGES president.
That's the last music you'll hear from me until tonight. Brian, thank you for that very kind and generous introduction. It's been an absolute incredible pleasure to work with all the exec, but in particular with Brian this year. We've become great friends, and you have a very a clear vision about the things that you want to accomplish in the coming years, and I know that the organization is in great hands under your leadership this coming year, so thank you so much. Mom, I'm sorry you had to see that picture of me on the backboard. But it was okay. There were a lot of surgeons out on the slopes that day. This was actually the Sunday right before the SAGES meeting started that I unadvisedly went skiing. And my greatest fear as I was being skied on that sled down the mountains is that I might not be able to attend Dan Jones's special Fuse Task Force meeting the following day. So, but seriously though, I appreciate Brian Duncan and Val Halpin trekking back up the slopes to come attend to me and all that you have done. This is my disclosure slide, none of which relates to this talk. The last time SAGES met in Nashville was in 1994, in this same venue, in fact. The SAGES president was George Bursey, and so it's a special privilege to be standing here where Dr. Bursey gave his address 21 years ago, almost to the day. Moreover, when I consider the icons of minimally invasive surgery and fathers of the laparoscopic revolution who've been in this position, I'm indeed humbled and incredibly honored to have had the opportunity to serve as your SAGES president this past year. I was a relative newcomer to SAGES in 1994, having joined the society 2 years prior in 1992 at the urging of Nat Soper. 1992 was also my first SAGES meeting in Washington, D.C., and it was a meeting I will never forget. The energy and excitement were literally palpable because the laparoscopic revolution was underway in full force, and it seemed almost every week brought some new technology or technique to clinical practice. SAGES was, of course, leading that revolution, and as I reflect back, it's amazing to see the evolution of our society to one that has impacted education and training, research, and innovation in virtually every aspect of GI and endoscopic surgery. That meeting, coincidentally and perhaps propitiously for me, was also the debut of the lap wrappers and the precursor to the Friday main event that has become a signature feature of every SAGES meeting. But it was only 3 years prior to that 1992 meeting that SAGES was in reality something of a backwater society, a society of visionary surgeons who were committed to performing flexible endoscopy in surgical practice. I'd like to examine a bit of the pathway that allowed SAGES to evolve as it did, highlight some of our important current initiatives, and then end with a few personal reflections. Let me begin by reviewing with you what I consider to be 3 of the Sentinel events in the life of SAGES. And I'd like to first acknowledge a number of individuals who I interviewed and who helped provide material for this portion of my talk. In 1989, the SAGES meeting was held in April in Louisville, Kentucky. About 6 weeks before the meeting, Barbara Bursey received a call from Jacques Parasat, who told her he had a video of a laparoscopic cholecystectomy that he would like to show. There was some confusion at first. "Cholecystostomy, you mean?" she said. "No, cholecystectomy," he replied. The program was full, but Barbara called Wayne Schlesinger, the program chair for the meeting, and told him they had to find a spot for this. So Professor Parasat was given a slot in the exhibit hall to show his video. An announcement was put into the meeting packet of a special video presentation during one of the breaks. This story, by the way, was retold at the 2009 meeting, and you can read Professor Parasat's description about it in Surgical Endoscopy. At that SAGES meeting, there were about 210 attendees, and perhaps 60 to 70 of these showed up to watch the lap chole video. The exhibit hall in 1989 was a shadow of itself, with only about 20 exhibitors total. The impact and importance of Professor Parasat's video was immediately apparent to the SAGES leaders there. It was described as visually striking, a tremendous awakening, amazing. But what came next was crucial. Several of the SAGES leaders convened afterwards and said, "We can't leave this meeting without discussing what this means." They recognized that something significant had happened, that it was a disruptive technology, and they knew they had to act on it. It was never a question of whether, but of how. So why did SAGES leaders decide to move on this? One was concerned that gastroenterologists might consider doing this, since some were already doing diagnostic laparoscopy, and SAGES had already been engaged with them over the flexible endoscopy issues and realized what could be at stake. Second, these surgeons were accustomed to doing procedures using an endoscope, so the translation to the laparoscope with the effects of magnification and improved visualization made sense. And third, what other surgical society was going to step up and take on this issue? SAGES quickly put together a position statement crafted by Ken Ford and others and published in Surgical Endoscopy and in the Bulletin of the American College of Surgeons, stating that only someone who did open cholecystectomy should do it laparoscopically. Things moved rapidly from there. Within less than 1 year of this video being shown at the meeting, the first guideline on lap chole came out from SAGES. George Bursey and Alfred Cuschieri collaborated on a book entitled Laparoscopic Biliary Surgery, which was published in 1990 and sold over 25,000 copies in multiple languages. The first lap chole postgraduate course was held at the 1990 meeting in Atlanta, and over the next year, the SAGES office was bombarded with up to 100 calls per week from surgeons asking about courses for cholecystectomy. There were one-day courses popping up all over that were highly variable. And so SAGES developed a series of train-the-trainer courses so that surgeons at academic and training institutions would be able to teach laparoscopy to their trainees and other surgeons. In doing this, SAGES helped provide some formal structure to the courses that were being taught. Not only did SAGES help in the training for lap chole, but to quote Jeff Ponsky, SAGES learned how to lead an entire nation and world in the laparoscopic revolution. And it was with lap chole that the whole concept of proctoring was born. At the 1990 meeting in Atlanta, attendance had more than doubled to 450, and at Monterey in 1991, it was 775, with many more who called SAGES and begged to get into the meeting and the laparoscopic hands-on courses. And the growth of the annual meeting continued at an almost exponential rate through the 1990s, until the 2000 mark was reached first in 2002, then again in 2007, a level at which we have stayed ever since. Between 1990 and 1992, about 15,000 general surgeons in the U.S. were trained in this procedure. SAGES needed faculty for the 22 train-the-trainer courses in the first year, and there were more young surgeons who had been in some of these courses. And so, unlike the traditional surgical paradigm where you teach courses when you're mid-career or later, these train-the-trainer courses were largely taught by the young surgeons, such as Nat Soper, John Hunter, Lee Swanstrom, Jonathan Sakier, Joe Peatland, and many others. Why did they get involved? According to Nat Soper, SAGES was this radical breakaway society, and this was another breakthrough technology. You couldn't get an abstract on lap chole at a mainstream meeting, and SAGES was willing to let young people come in and do things and get involved in teaching. He said, "It's hard to appreciate today how much against the grain this went." These young surgeons were trained in flexible endoscopy and were doing biliary surgery already, and so they readily embraced laparoscopy and put together clinical outcome studies to address some of the key questions early on. The association that some had with major academic institutions also helped establish credibility to the movement. And they also established a new pathway to building an academic career, and out of this, a new generation of SAGES leaders emerged, several of whom went on to become president of this organization. Despite the obvious advantages and excitement that accompanied the laparoscopic revolution, there was a problem, and that was the increase in the rate of biliary injuries. In New York, the presence of biliary and other serious injuries almost led the state to put a moratorium on this procedure. Fortunately, that did not happen, thanks to the efforts of Ken Ford and Rick Green, who was SAGES president then. But unfortunately, despite a quarter century of surgeons performing lap chole, the problem of biliary injury has not gone away, a problem to which I will return. A second Sentinel event in the life of SAGES was the formation of the SAGES Education and Research Foundation in 1999. The birth of the SAGES Foundation was due to the vision of SAGES leaders, Greg Steigman, Ken Ford, Jeff Ponsky, Barbara Bursey, and others, who saw the need for an organization separate from SAGES in which the strategy was long-term. They recognized even then that the days of abundant support from industry would not last forever, and they saw the need well before the heightened awareness regarding conflict of interest issues that a corpus of dollars that could be used to independently fund projects would be in the best interests of GI and endoscopic surgery, patient care, and surgical education over the long term. They held a strategic planning meeting in New York City and went about raising the funds to set this in motion. The corpus was started with incredibly generous donations from industry, and the founders also put their money where their mouth was, with each foundation board member committing to donating $5,000 over time. The foundation has been ably led by former SAGES presidents Greg Steigman, Rick Green, Bruce Shermer, and now Desmond Burkett, who takes over as president of the foundation as of this meeting. The foundation is a big part of the success of our organization and has provided critical support to numerous projects and programs over the years: FLS, FES, FUSE, the Global Program, Career Development Award, the Brandeis Award, numerous research grants, and other projects. SAGES has regularly contributed funds to the foundation and also matches member contributions annually, with over $1.6 million total given to the foundation. But we've received more in return. For every dollar SAGES has given to the foundation, SAGES has received back over $1.5 to fund SAGES education and research projects, over $2.5 million total. Many SAGES members have given generously to the foundation, most notably Dr. Pan, whose recent philanthropic gift will support life-changing advances in laparoscopic surgery in the developing world. But we can and must do more. The foundation needs greater support by our active membership. I regret to say that of the over 3,700 active members of our organization, the annual contribution rate is under 10%. We can do a lot better. Let me tell you a brief story from one of our SAGES members, Rob Lim. Rob's been a leader of our military working group for the last several years. Earlier this week, he received the Gold Foundation-supported SAGES Clinical Excellence and Humanism in Medicine Award. Rob was unable to accept this award in person, as he was recently deployed to Afghanistan for 6 months. Instead, he's requested that the $1,000 honorarium for his award be donated to the SAGES Foundation. He said very simply, "The donation is the least I could do for SAGES after all it has done for my career and professional development." So let me charge each of you to make the foundation a top priority for your charitable giving every year. No gift is too small. The important thing is to become a donor at any level. Join the SAGES World campaign the foundation has initiated this year to extend the SAGES global contributions to education, research, and training. The foundation is a part of the SAGES brand, and it's up to us to support it and help expand the reach of our organization. A third Sentinel event for SAGES was a decision made very early in the life of our society. And that was the decision in 1984 to hire Barbara Saltzman, who of course later became Barbara Bursey, to manage SAGES. SAGES had been managed by a PR firm, but needed someone who could do more administrative and secretarial work. Jerry Marks had known Barbara, who lived in Philadelphia at the time, and it was he who proposed the idea to her. Tom Dent and Ken Ford interviewed her and made the decision. They described her as smart and a quick learner, highly energetic, articulate, and persuasive. She took care of things in a business-like fashion and was organized and perceptive. She understood this was an opportunity to facilitate something new, to work with a group of young, idealistic surgeons who were not in the traditional mold, and was also an opportunity for her to develop an organization and grow as well. She learned about what SAGES was engaged in from a surgical standpoint and was willing to ask questions. She understood the people and the potential for the growth of the society. She was persistent, always working to do the right thing and hard to say no to, especially when she said, "You have to do this now." She had great strength and was devoted in a way that few were devoted. Surgeons looked up to her as a voice of conscience within the organization. It was a different and unique relationship. To quote one SAGES leader, "SAGES is what it is today in part because of her exemplary vision and remarkable dedication." SAGES soon became family for her, not just as a SAGES mother, which of course she is and always will be, but as she and George Bursey married in 1989, and she and BSC moved to LA. Initially, Barbara managed SAGES by herself, but as the organization grew, she hired some part-time staff and then gradually some full-time employees. And in 1993, a young woman walked into Barbara's office looking for temporary employment as a secretary while she pursued a musical career as a singer. Her only stipulation was that if she were called for an audition, she could get off work to go do that. Fortunately for SAGES, the musical career did not work out, and Sally Matthews quickly took on more and more responsibilities within SAGES. Like Barbara, she's very bright and clearly had a lot of talent when it came to managing an organization and a group of surgeons. In 1998, Sally became executive director of SAGES, and in 2008, president and CEO of BSC. And Barbara has, of course, continued to be involved in SAGES and the foundation. BSC now has over 50 employees and manages 18 societies, but the personal attention that we get makes it seem we're the only one. As anyone who's been in this position would tell you, I can't imagine leading this society without Sally at the helm. Together, Barbara and Sally have given our organization continuity of management for more than 30 years and collectively have a phenomenal institutional memory about SAGES and all its operations and activities. But perhaps most importantly, and what sets aside this relationship from any other society and management group I've been a part of, is how spiritually and intellectually invested they are with us and our mission. They are a part of the very fabric of our organization, and we owe them a huge debt of gratitude. And so I'd like to ask Barbara, Sally, and the entire BSC staff to stand and be recognized for all your work and contributions on behalf of our organization. Let me now turn to the present and spend a few moments highlighting some of SAGE's recent efforts. This year, we reached a milestone as we celebrated 10 years of the FLS program, a story that was featured in the Bulletin of the American College of Surgeons last fall, another incredible SAGES undertaking and story in and of itself. And SAGES awarded the 10,000th FLS certificate to Chris Crawford, a general surgery resident at the Marshfield Clinic in Wisconsin. FES also went live last year and will be required of all graduating general surgery residents in the U.S. as of 2018. It's been 15 years now since To Err is Human brought to attention the problem of potentially preventable hospital-related injuries and death. SAGES has undoubtedly impacted this area in terms of our many education and training programs, but we can do more. Indeed, a goal of this presidential year for me has been to enhance awareness and efforts of our society around patient safety. Aurora Pryor and Michael Holtzman have put on a fabulous meeting with the theme of promoting a universal culture of innovation, safety, and improved outcomes in GI surgery. I hope you've noticed throughout the program the Band-Aids labeling various sessions and talks that relate to patient safety issues. We also have a phenomenal opportunity right before us with the FUSE program. The brainchild of Steve Schweitzberg, in just 4 years, this program has gone from concept to reality under the leadership of Dan Jones, Leanne Feldman, Pascal Fuchshuber, and Tom Robinson. FUSE went live this past September and has already created tremendous interest across the surgical world. I dare say there's no other area in surgery which so ubiquitously impacts almost everything we do, and yet about which surgeons are so lacking in fundamental knowledge and understanding. I certainly did not realize how uninformed I was about surgical energy until I got involved in the FUSE project. Let's take just one example, OR fires. It's estimated that there are 200 to 240 OR fires that occur in the U.S. every year. Not a large number, certainly when you consider the millions of procedures performed annually. And most of these are minor and don't cause any harm, but up to 20 to 30 are serious and result in disfiguring injuries or even death. We have every element needed to start a fire in the OR. Fuel with our drapes and alcohol-based preps, igniters with our electrosurgical equipment, and high-intensity light cords, and oxidizers, oxygen. And it can happen in a flash, literally. A story that I've heard on more than one occasion is a surgeon was taking off a mole or cyst on the scalp or face. Oxygen was being given via nasal cannula. The electrosurgical unit was activated, and there was a spark and a flash beneath the drapes. And this is the result. This young woman's story was told on the Today Show 4 years ago, and unfortunately, it's not the last one like it I've heard about since. This is a totally preventable event, and it's a top safety priority for the FDA, which has an OR Fire Prevention Week each fall, and with whom SAGES is engaged on this issue. It simply requires that we all understand the risk and are vigilant about taking the appropriate precautions. FUSE can make a difference here, I'm convinced, This is our program, and SAGES members need to lead the way. So let me pose a challenge to you, that every surgeon in this audience, allied health personnel too, over the next 12 months become FUSE certified. But not only that, once you're FUSE certified, become an energy safety leader and advocate at your home institution. Give talks about it. Engage your OR leadership. Discuss ways to prevent OR fires and other electrosurgical injuries. This will, I'm convinced, have a major impact on how our operative teams approach energy safety in the OR and a positive patient impact. The second SAGES patient safety initiative goes back to the problem of laparoscopic cholecystectomy and biliary injury. Although it's been 25 years since lap chole was introduced into practice, bile duct injuries continue to occur. Even if the biliary injury rate is only 0.2%, and it may be higher, especially for acutely inflamed gallbladders, that translates to 3,000 or more biliary injuries in the U.S. each year. A bile duct injury can be a devastating outcome for the patient who otherwise would have undergone an outpatient procedure with minimal pain and prompt return to normal activities. And it can also be emotionally devastating for the surgeon. This past year, at my direction, SAGES has formed the Safe Cholecystectomy Task Force, led by Rob Finelli and Horacio Asman, with a mission to enhance a universal culture of safety for cholecystectomy in an effort to reduce biliary injuries. A multimodal educational program is being developed to address this issue. But there are already things we can do now to move this initiative forward by incorporating these 6 steps into our practices, which are the cornerstone of the Safe Chole program. Learn about the critical view of safety and use it on every cholecystectomy case. Consider an intraoperative timeout. In other words, a brief stop point, a pause, during the procedure before clipping or cutting any ductal structures. Understand aberrant anatomy. Use cholangiography or other methods to image the biliary tree intraoperative liberally. Recognize when the dissection is approaching a zone of danger, and stop before entering that zone in the difficult case. If conditions around the gallbladder are too unfavorable, put in a cholecystostomy tube or do a subtotal cholecystectomy. And finally, for really difficult cases, consider getting help from another surgeon. Go to the SAGES website and read more about this. Impacting this problem will not be easy because it will require a change in culture about an operation that surgeons know how to do and do well, and that the vast majority of time is straightforward and uncomplicated. But if we don't take this on, then this problem will never go away, and we will be abdicating our responsibility to our patients to make surgery safer. So I implore you to adopt these measures, spread the word about the SAGES Safe Chole program, and together, let's start doing something about this problem now. So for the final portion of this address, I'd like to shift gears a bit and share with you a few thoughts and concepts I've gleaned from my perspective of 25 years in surgical practice. First, there are multiple pathways to success. My own pathway to the present has been a bit of a non-linear one. I started out as a general and endocrine surgeon, and although I began doing laparoscopic surgery in 1990, didn't really make that the main focus of my practice until a few years later. I served on some SAGES committees in the 1990s, but I think I first really became noticed when at the sing-off in 2001 at the meeting in St. Louis, I debuted the scoping stones and was subsequently drafted into the lap wrappers. Seriously though, when I co-chaired the Continuing Education Committee, Dan Smith gave me the opportunity to produce the SAGES Grand Round series. And although these never quite became the bestsellers that I had hoped for, there were 2 things of significance that did come out of that project. One, it gave us some additional quality materials that helped SAGES connect with and become a member of the SCORE Council. And 2, it gave me the experience in filming and video production that was invaluable in producing the Bercy documentary film. So my message to you is to take advantage of the opportunities that come your way in SAGES. A SAGES leader will support you and get you on a committee or involved in a resident course and help push your name along. But much more important is what you make of that opportunity. Because SAGES, ultimately, is a society that functions as a meritocracy and that rewards individuals who volunteer for projects, who are responsive and organized, and get the work done to move our society's agenda forward. 2, put yourself back on the learning curve. Some of you are still very much on your learning curve, whether in residency, fellowship, or even the first few years of your practice, but the learning curve in surgery never stops. In his book Outliers, Malcolm Gladwell talks about the factors that differentiate individuals who have achieved not just success, but extraordinary success in their life's work. Although there are many variables, one factor is the 10,000-hour rule, Erickson's work that shows that what differentiates levels of performance, interestingly, his early studies looked at musical performance, is that the people at the top not only work harder, but much, much harder than anyone else. And so that takes me to the Beatles, since this is, after all, a SAGES Magical Mystery Tour. Before the Beatles came to America to appear on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1964, they'd been playing together for 7 years. They were still a struggling high school rock band when they were invited to Hamburg, Germany in 1960 to perform in the clubs there. It was an unusual arrangement. They played nonstop shows, hour after hour, up to 8 hours a day. John Lennon said, in Liverpool, we only played for an hour and just our best numbers, so we had to find a new way of playing. Over the next year and a half, they did 3 stints in Hamburg, performing over 270 nights and an estimated 1,200 times live. Philip Norman, who wrote the Beatles biography Shout, said, they were no good on stage when they went there, but they were very good when they came back, and they sounded like no one else. It was the making of them. Amazingly, their greatest artistic successes, Sgt. Pepper's, Magical Mystery Tour, and the White Album, came only 5 years after that return from Hamburg. I think the early days of the laparoscopic revolution were somewhat like that. A generation of young surgeons who had, for the most part, not done any laparoscopic surgery in training. In fact, a survey of SAGES past presidents from 1995 to the present showed that of the individuals who finished training 1989 or earlier, only 1/4 had any experience with laparoscopy before they started doing lap chole. And I'm quite certain that I will be the last SAGES president who did not do a single laparoscopic case during residency training. So what did they do? Well, they went to the lab, did procedures there, they worked with GYN surgeons at their institution who were doing laparoscopy, they practiced and honed their skills, they learned how to suture, they worked with industry to develop the tools needed to perform more advanced and complex cases, and carefully introduced new techniques into surgical practice. Out of this also was born the impetus for the development of formal skills training for surgical residency, something that did not even exist prior to that time. They were also not willing to limit themselves by the present constraints and considerations of what was possible. Third, don't be so quick to claim your limitations when you've never really tested them. I first saw this quote a few years ago on the message board in the locker room of one of our pro sports teams in St. Louis. Although our hockey team has never quite fulfilled this admonition with playoff success, I've thought about it a lot, and it's too easy to get comfortable with your situation oftentimes and not challenge yourself, but you won't ever realize your full potential if you don't push yourself from time to time. My original plan this year was to cut back a bit clinically in order to devote more time to SAGES, but those plans quickly dissolved due to some faculty departures, and this has turned out instead to be the busiest clinical year I've ever had by far, something I could have not managed without a lot of support from my colleagues and staff. But the point is, sometimes you have to reach down inside yourself for that extra gear in order to meet a challenge or to carry you through difficult times. In the movie A League of Their Own, about a women's professional baseball team during World War II, one of the star players complains to the manager, played by Tom Hanks, that she wants to quit because it's just become too hard. His reply is, "Of course it's hard. The hard is what makes it so good." Finally, keep the main thing the main thing. A senior surgeon said to me early in my career, "Take care of your family first, and everything else in your career will fall into place." I've been blessed by family in many ways. There's my WashU family, in particular, my wonderful partners and colleagues, past and present, Brent Matthews, who I learned so much from during his 10 years in St. Louis, Chris Egan and Michael Awad. My staff, Kim and Mary, who've been such a huge support this year in so many ways and have had to take on more and more responsibilities without once complaining. Peggy Frisella, who keeps our MIS Institute going, and my OR staff, Julie, Sly, the rest of the OR team. There's my SAGES family. Yes, SAGES is really like family. I owe so much in my SAGES career to so many individuals, but in particular, a special thanks to Nat Soper, who was my colleague at WashU for many years, and who got me involved in SAGES and for his continued support. And also to Mark Talamini, Steve Schweitzberg, and Dan DeZiel for their friendship and mentorship over the years. The SAGES Executive Committee, who worked so hard and commit their best to leading the society to achieve its goals and aspirations. Sally, it's been so incredible to work so closely with you this year. Your calming influence, incredible knowledge about SAGES and organization have been amazing to behold. Then there's my family. My mom and dad, who gave this small-town Mississippi boy the opportunity to pursue a dream and encouraged me every step of the way, and who sacrificed so I could get a good education. Our two wonderful boys, Eric and his wife, Lindsay, and our precious granddaughter, Timothy, and his fiancée, Stephanie. I'm so proud of them and the fine young men they've become. And my dear wife, Beth, who is so accomplished in her own right and is not only one of the best liver and GI pathologists in the world, but also a wonderful mother, a loving wife with a kind and caring heart. Her indomitable spirit is an inspiration to me on a daily basis, and I can't thank you enough for all your love and support this year. One of my favorite movies is Field of Dreams. I won't recant the story in detail, but it's about a farmer in Iowa by the name of Ray Kinsella, who hears a voice telling him to build a baseball field on his farm, to which Shoeless Joe Jackson and other 1919-era baseball players return from the afterlife to play games. Perhaps it resonates with me because as a kid, I dreamed of playing baseball, but instead became a doctor like Archie Moonlight Graham in the movie. But also because at the end, Ray's dad, who'd also been a baseball player and had passed away years before, returns to play on this field, and they have a game of catch. And as his dad surveys the pristine field and Ray's family, he asks, "Is this heaven?" And Ray says, "No, it's Iowa." But then he thinks again, and as he looks around at what he has and says, "Maybe it is heaven." When I consider the many blessings in my life, my friends and colleagues and family from me, this is a bit of heaven on earth. It's been a great honor to serve as your SAGES president this year. Thank you so much, and God bless. So much.
Michael, thank you, and for all you've done for the society and for the work that you've done this last year. And in commemoration of that, I'd like to give you a plaque, a quote from Lao Tzu. The quote says, "A leader is great when people barely know he exists. When his work is done, his aim fulfilled, they will say, 'We did it ourselves.'" Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Brian. Thank you so much. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to take a short break.